What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Rad Talks. Today, let's talk real estate. Specifically, let's talk about the top things I wish I had known before I became a landlord. One of the biggest things to remember as a landlord is it is a business. You are running a business. You're not running a charity. You're not there to help someone. You're not there to help friends or family. Bottom line, end of the day, it is a business and you have to treat it as a business. This doesn't mean that you have to be unfair, not at all. In fact, you need to be fair, you need to treat people right. But at the same time, remember, this is a business. And because it's a business, you have to detach yourself from the emotional side of the decisions that you make as a landlord. Let's also talk about management companies, whether or not you even want to use a management company. A lot of management companies charge 10 to 20% in a management fee. Then on top of that, they're going to charge for additional fees, maintenance, anything like that comes through. Another thing of importance to remember, it's a business. You need to file an entity. You need to make this an LLC. Make it a legitimate business. This is going to protect you on multiple aspects. It's going to reduce your liability, legal liability. If anything were to happen, your liability is reduced to the properties or the assets of that specific entity. That is so important, especially to start owning multiple properties. You can do this as an LLC or other entity forms. Typically, people use an LLC. You also don't want to commingle funds. And what that means is you need a separate business account for the monies that are coming in and the monies that are going out. And this is going to keep your personal assets and your assets of the LLC, going to keep them completely separate. So if something were to happen to your property, if you were to fall to a lawsuit, it's going to keep these assets totally separate. If you've structured it properly and you've maintained the separation between the business and your personal assets, then someone can't come after those properties because they are their own separate entity, their own separate business, and vice versa. If something were to happen within those properties, someone can't come after you to go to you to one of your other properties. It helps keep them completely separate. This is very important from a legal aspect. Okay, so let's say you have a property. You already have an LLC. Now what? Next steps. What are you going to do? How are you going to list this property and what kind of tenant do you want in there? There's three major ways of making revenue as a landlord, or three separate ways of really structuring this. One is the simplest, long-term tenant. Another is throwing your listing on Airbnb or VRBO, something short-term vacation rental. You're talking around a week or so at the most. Sometimes it's just for a weekend that's being rented. A third strategy, which is corporate housing. A lot of people choose to go this route because you have the income as if it were Airbnb, sometimes even higher than that. Substantial income because it's still short term, yet you have a few months locked in of a contract. So maybe a month, maybe 6 months of a contract that's locked in, sometimes only 3 months. So you have the stability of that, but you have it being paid as if it's an Airbnb, and it's a fully furnished property. And you end up with some of the highest or the most respectful guests. What you have here is a situation where you have an agreement for anywhere from 1 month, 3 months, 6 months with you and another entity usually. And oftentimes they use this for traveling type positions like traveling nurses. They'll stay in these sort of situations a lot of times. Or people who need to move around frequently, relocate for work. These sort of situations are who you're targeting. And there's management companies out there designed just to handle these sort of situations. They'll handle the actual client procurement, they'll handle screening the tenants, putting them in, everything like that, and they'll just write you a check at the end of the month based off the revenue that came in, and they're going to take their percentage, obviously. The upside to offering it as corporate housing is you have tenants who usually take really good care of the place because they're there on business. So it's their living environment. So they take care of the place as if they're living in it. This differs drastically from something like Airbnb or VRBO, where people are there to vacation, to party, having get-togethers, short-term, lots of alcohol, lots of music, lots of complaints, lots of potential for things to get broken. You have lower risk of things getting broken in corporate housing, better chance of people taking care of your property in corporate housing. Now, keep in mind, not all HOAs allow this. If you're in an HOA, you might not have an HOA, but if you're in an HOA, you're gonna have to check with the CC&Rs to make sure that you can within the rules of your HOA. Another way of making money as a landlord, as a property owner really, is through Airbnb or VRBO or another vacation home platform. One of the advantages are usually you can get more money from short-term vacation rentals than you can from a long-term tenancy. However, that's also location dependent. So if you're in an area that has a lot of traffic, say next to Disney or Universal or some sort of resort or location or attraction that brings in millions and millions of visitors every year, or well-known beaches or anything like that, then Airbnb, VRBO, short-term rentals are going to be able to bring in a higher revenue. Revenue, however, does not always translate to profit. And that's one of the things you've got to realize with short-term rentals, as well as with real estate as a whole. With short-term rentals, a significant cost goes to the management company. So one way of eliminating that is if you live near the property or you're regularly near it, anything that allows you to be able to manage it yourself or even build up your own management company, even if it only manages your own property, something that would allow you to be able to manage it from afar, that's how you can reduce the cost of the management company. Typically, for vacation rentals, management companies charge about 20%. Sometimes you can find one for 15%, sometimes you can find one for 10%. However, buyer beware. You really do get what you pay for. That also doesn't mean you always get what you pay for. What I mean by that is just because they charge 20% doesn't mean they're going to even perform as well as 20%. But I can almost guarantee you if they only charge 10%, you're going to be getting a substandard performance from your management company. Things you're going to need to look for with a management company are their vacancy rate of their other properties they manage. You're also going to want to be able to see if you can talk to at least one other property owner who uses them as a management company. You want to know if they're actually happy with them. You want to know if they feel like they're getting gouged with pricing. Another thing to consider is a management company is not the owner of the property. So that means they don't actually care as much about the furniture or about the property itself. They make their money off of that percentage, that commission. So if they're getting 20% of whatever revenue they get into your place, they don't even care if you're losing money on the back end from expenses, as long as they're getting the money in and they're getting their 20%. That's ultimately what they care about. So their pricing, you want to know about the pricing, you want to know how they price other houses as well, in houses in that area. Let's say that you have a house and you have a $1,500 mortgage payment on it, and you have other expenses, another $500 a month expenses. So you have $2,000 a month in expenses. Let's say this is a really large house, and it should, on vacation rental, should bring in $4,000 a month. However, this management company might see a slow down period or anything like that, and so they might be worried more about putting people in there than they are about the overall price. So they might sometimes just set it for $1,000 a month, or the equivalent of where it would be $1,000 a month. They don't care that you're now losing money because they're still getting their 20%. They put someone in there for $1,000 a month, they're getting $200 a month off of that, plus the other fees, the cleaning fee, for example, or service fees, or any additional add-ons. All of those go to the maintenance or to the management company. You, as the owner, as a landlord, do not see any of that. This is one of the things you want to check when you're vetting a management company for a short-term rental, is check the agreements, see who actually gets those fees. And these are also things that you, if you were to manage your own vacation rental, if you chose to go vacation rental route, you can actually make more income if you pick up these yourself. So if you self-manage those cleaning fees, the $130 every single time you have someone stay at your place, that goes straight into your pocket. You can hire out a manager or a cleaning company, or you can pocket it yourself and do the cleaning yourself. That's free money. That's easy money. Any sort of add-on, any sort of additional cleaning, any sort of, let's say that you rent out a barbecue on their $75 a pop for the barbecue, that would then also go to you as opposed to the management company. Okay, so a third way of being a landlord is a long-term tenancy with a long-term tenant. So let's say you choose to go long-term tenant. How do you even get the tenant? Let's start there. There's a lot of really good online tools. Well, first, you could just hire out a management company. Again, we've been talking about management companies, and the same applies here. A management company will put someone into your property for you. Yes, but they're also going to charge you. If they go and they find the tenant and you're just starting with them, they're probably going to lock you into a year-long lease. Now, keep in mind, this is a year long that you don't even know how their performance is. So that is really risky. If you're signing a year-long agreement with someone saying you're not going to use anyone else, or you're still going to continue to pay them a fee even if you do use someone else for an entire year without knowing if they can even perform, that's risky. I've done it and I got burnt. One of the management companies, in fact, that I first started using, and they put in my first tenant, I would have my monthly expenses and I would pay them, and I believe they were charging me 10% if I remember correctly. Now, I was in the property at a really good position. I had a low mortgage. It was set to cash flow. It should have cash flow. Yet, ironically, every single month, those additional maintenance fees always seemed to be equal to whatever my cash flow would have been. So let's say it would have cash flowed $350 in January. Well, they take out their 10%, all my bills are paid, there's $350, and now suddenly there's some maintenance call that they had to go out there and talk with the tenant for, and wow, it came out to with $349. Cash flow of $1. Okay, maybe that was a fluke. Let's look at February. Same story, over and over and over and over again. In fact, there was one time they charged me like $500 because there was some issue with one of the sprinklers in the front yard. The $500 was for them, unqualified, to go out there, dig a giant hole around the sprinkler, break something on the sprinkler itself, cause it to overflow or to start flooding, then call out a professional, and then I still had to pay the professional fee plus the $500 I had to pay to these guys who had no clue what they were even doing in the first place. These are the sort of things that led me to firing that management company. I was under a 1-year contract with them as well. And at the end of that year, I fired them. The first tenant, I didn't know much information about the first tenant. They were screened by the management company. They handled all of that for me. And the second tenant that came in was the one that was in place when I fired the management company. So I fired them. I flew out there because I was living in Florida at the time, and this was all in Oregon. I flew out there to meet the tenants face to face, and they were extremely grateful. In fact, they told me they had been planning to leave the property just because of the management company. That's how bad the management company was. Once I started self-managing it, they were beyond happy, and they stayed for several years later. So that's my note about management companies. Now, there's other ways of getting tenants into your property. You can do it yourself with Craigslist, something along those lines. You can also talk to a realtor. Some realtors specialize entirely in rentals. Usually you pay about 1 month's worth of rent to the to the realtor upon a commission. So when they put someone in there, then you'll pay them about 1 month's worth of rent, typically, or you can negotiate your own terms. Everything is negotiable, because keep in mind, this is a business. Everything in business, just like everything in life, is negotiable. If you go the route of a realtor, they can also handle a lot of the background check information for you, or at least acquire that information for you to make the ultimate decision. Another route, and this is one that I really like, is Zillow. Because today, everyone is going online and everyone is checking things themselves. Just like people are looking at prices themselves, they're evaluating things themselves, and they're using Zillow a lot. They're looking for the new apartments on Zillow. They're looking for the new houses on Zillow, and they're looking to rent on Zillow. Zillow makes it really easy to be able to set up a owner's side and to be able to list your property. And currently, or the last time I used it for this purpose, it was free for your first property of that year. So if you have multiple properties and you're listing it multiple times, the first listing is going to be free. The other ones you're going to be paying, I want to say it was like $10 a week for the listing. It was something very small that really didn't factor in at all. The advantages to using Zillow to find a tenant is they can apply right through Zillow. So Zillow is going to charge the tenant, the prospective tenant, a fee. And part of that fee is going to be doing a background check, doing a credit check, all of that information that goes into the tenant's packet. They hold this for, I want to say, a month or something along those lines. And the tenant can then take and send this, when they apply, they can send it to any property they're interested in looking at. And you, as a landlord, can see this information. So Zillow has done a lot of legwork for you, and they've done the advertising for you, which is great. That's phenomenal. So all you have to do then is list with quality listings, an accurate description, and then sit back and let Zillow do the actual marketing and bring in these clients or the possible prospective tenants to you for you to decide which one you actually want to go with. You can meet with the tenants afterwards. You can do a showing with them afterwards. You can follow up with them and see, are they the type of tenant you're looking for to live in your home? Something to keep in mind when you're looking at a potential tenant. You have all the information in front of you, so make the best decision possible. Think of it as who is going to take the best care of your property, because keep in mind, at the end of the day, this is your property. When they leave in 12 months or however long the lease is, they leave, they're gone. That's still your property. Do you want walls to be standing in a roof there? Yes, obviously. Do you want to go in and have to remodel it because they destroyed anything or didn't take care of anything? No, absolutely not. So really try to figure out who is going to be the person who's most likely to take care of it. You can figure these questions out even just by asking them simple questions or figuring out their sort of style. Like, walk them through the house and ask them, what are you feeling about this living room to you? How will you decorate this living room? Walk them into the kitchen. How will you rearrange things in here? What are you feeling and thinking for where the dishes should go? These sort of things. You start to get a picture of the person's mind and how they think and where they arrange things and sort of their overall tendency to maintain things. You'll also be able to pick up on if they notice things like a light bulb being out or anything like that. That's going to tell you that they're in tune to potential issues with the property. Something like a light bulb being out is not going to keep them from signing a lease with you and coming into the property, but it is going to let you know if there's someone who can pick up on it and if they're going to want to maintain it themselves as well. If you go the route of a management company for your long-term tenant, all the maintenance is going to be handled by the management company, and you're going to pay for it. If you're self-managing, then you're going to want to get a tenant in there who's going to be able to identify any issues that you need to fix or identify issues that they can fix. And you need to make sure that they actually do fix it and will fix it. Something to also keep in mind, a big point on all of my properties, is the AC. You want a tenant who is going to regularly change the AC filter. If they don't change the AC filter, it's going to back up, it's going to clog up, it's going to, you basically end up with a situation where you get ice buildup inside. You have all sorts of issues that can actually come of this, and almost always, unless you live right there, it's going to require you hiring out a professional AC repair guy to come out there to reevaluate the exact same thing that it was just a few months ago and do the exact same fix that it was just a few months ago. And you are going to have to pay for that. So you're going to want to make sure that you have a tenant who can actually do those sort of small things. You want a tenant who's going to take out trash. You want a tenant who's going to be able to identify if bulbs are burnt out. You want a tenant who's going to regularly clean to keep animals from coming in the house, or rodents or anything like that. I want to make a quick note here as well. Under no circumstance can you or should you ever make a rental decision based off of someone's race, gender, sex, identity, anything, any of the protected classes, anything like that. Don't even consider it. It shouldn't even be in your mind when you make a decision on which tenant to go with. Just get that out of your mind entirely. One thing I like about using Zillow for myself, I use Zillow myself on my properties, is they will walk you through the lease, and they will make sure it at least generally conforms to your state's laws. I say generally conforms because I have not reviewed all the states, and I individually review mine, but I haven't reviewed any of these others, so I can't give a stamp of guarantee approval saying that this absolutely will be 100% legally correct. Unless you take it to an attorney in your state, you won't be able to get that guarantee either. Another thing that Zillow will help you with is the actual rent collection. So they have a direct deposit on Zillow that your tenant can then sign up for. They send them a link, they sign up for it, enter in the bank account information. You as a landlord never even see their bank account information, which is great. Privacy is protected that way. They enter it in, and then it starts getting deducted on the first of the month or whatever the time interval is you set. They also have the way of collecting the deposit from there. They also have a way of collecting extra fees from there. This makes your life as a landlord a lot easier because you don't even have to worry about collecting rent at that point. You don't have to go knock on anyone's doors or anything like that. As long as it's set up and as long as everyone's abiding by the terms, every month they can have it on auto deduct. So every month it'll automatically be taken out of their account. No one has to worry about anything. And I have a much higher rate on my properties. I have a much higher rate of tenants paying on time and not missing payments by leveraging this feature of Zillow. So big thing I wish I'd known about being a landlord when I got into it really was the management companies. I know we've talked a little bit about it so far, but you need to vet no matter which structure you're going with. If you're doing corporate housing, you're doing Airbnb short-term rentals, or you're managing it, or you're doing a long-term tenancy, and you choose to use a management company, you really need to vet that management company. Find reviews, find online reviews, Google reviews, Facebook reviews, any review you can find on them, as well as ask them for one of their happy clients, one of their happy customers. Ask them so you can set up and you can actually talk to them. A lot of them won't let you do this, one, because a lot of them don't want you to talk to any of them because they probably won't give you any sort of positive feedback. But they also sometimes really protect their client list. But see if there's someone that you can talk to, or you can find out who is using them, and you really want to get some sort of interview or talk to someone who has had some sort of connection or interaction with this management company in the past. Because otherwise, again, you have no idea how they're actually going to perform. You have no idea if they're actually just going to rip you off, legally rip you off at the same time, because they can charge you every time they come out there for maintenance. It's just they sometimes come out to maintenance for things that they shouldn't be coming out there for, which then means you then have to pay. The other thing about the management companies to remember is they do not own the property. You own the property. So at the end of the day, when they sit back and they collect their commission, bottom line, they don't care what the tenant is actually doing or if the tenant is taking care of the property. You're the only one who's vested in that, and you're the only one who's going to be able to protect against that. And that's one of the things I'm weary about using a management company. keep in mind, there's also a practical aspect. If you live 3,000 miles away, it's going to be really hard to manage that property unless you do exactly what I just said with a long-term tenancy, in which case I have personally done that from 3,000 miles away. But if you're talking about a short-term rental, that's going to be really hard to self-manage from 3,000 miles away, because you're going to have to regularly go into that property. You're going to have to be able to inspect, make sure, see if anyone broke anything, see what you're going to have to bill to that person who was just in there, as well as handling the actual cleaning of that unit. While you can outsource the actual physical cleaning itself, you can call up a cleaning company or have one that you regularly use and schedule with them at set times to come out there and clean it up after someone has lived in there. You're not always going to be able to get someone to walk through and do an inspection to make sure nothing was broken. Now, keep in mind, if you're doing short-term rental, you have thousands of dollars worth of furniture in there, depending upon the level of which it is. If you're doing a low-end apartment, for example, you might be furnishing it for only a few $1,000s with low-end furniture. If you're doing a high-end house, multiple rooms house, you might be talking about 10s or 20s, possibly even higher, depending on how luxury. You could even go to the hundreds of thousands of furniture in there. So the only person who's going to protect that furniture, protect that asset of yours, is you. No management company is going to care about that furniture. They say they will, but at the end of the day, they're not going to care about it because, again, they got their commission. They put someone in there. They got their cleaning fee. They're not getting any fee for a damaged sofa or for a broken bed or a broken appliance or broken table. There's no commission to them, so they don't care. Story time. This is a fun one for many reasons. I learned a lot. Let's put it that way. And hopefully you can learn some of the things that I learned without having to experience the pain that I experienced. So a few years back, right before COVID, I set up a couple of short-term rentals in this nice little area in the center of Florida. Some of you may have heard of it. It's right next to an attraction that involves a certain well-known mouse. And I had set up a couple of these houses there. I had put over $30,000 worth of furniture into these houses. One of them in particular was a 5-bedroom, 4-bath, and it had a large dining room area. So the only way to properly furnish that was to put a long table in there. Unfortunately, the only long table you can find ended up being this really nice one, high-end one, cost a little over $2,000, and each chair itself was about $200. I, at the time, also did not know a lot about short-term rentals and wanted to bring in an expert. So even after asking for several referrals and talking with several other people, I landed on this one management company. One of the things that stuck out to me was they were willing to do it for a low commission. I believe the commission was 10% a month, which, looking back on it, that should have been a huge red flag to me, but I only learned that through this mistake. So after working with them and vetting them, and they made a great first impression. In fact, they even went so far as to stick little things under the bed that said, if you can see this, you know it's been cleaned, like all sorts of crazy things that were pretty cool, I thought. They had a price breakdown of if towels were taken, if this were damaged, like a whole cost. Now, like if anything like that were to happen, they were going to charge the guest who had stayed there, and they were going to pass that on to me to replace it. They just didn't live up to this. Also, fun fact is this was right before COVID. So end of 2019, I did a risk analysis before entering into these because I recommend always doing research before any sort of business deal. Keep in mind, this is also a business. So I did a risk analysis to decide, is this a smart decision? And I concluded the only way that the property was not going to make money in 2020 is if there's some sort of global, worldwide pandemic type issue that were to happen that didn't just shut down the US economy, but actually shut down the entire world economy. Well, we all know what happened at the beginning of 2020. So you can blame me for COVID if you'd like, but I swear I did not have anything to do with it. Back to the management company and this table. It was during COVID times, so there weren't really that many people who were actually booking it. And I was starting to question the management company's practices. For one, I had done a surprise inspection on one of the properties and saw that it really wasn't as clean as they claimed to have cleaned it. Another time, they started charging me for things that I didn't approve of the work orders, and I didn't want those work orders to be done. And furthermore, when I went to inspect the work of what they did, they hadn't even done the work that they had charged me for. One of these surprise inspections, I went and I found the table was looked off and the chairs were repositioned, and I looked closer and every single one of the chairs had deep gouges in them. One of the chairs, in fact, was in the garage and had a missing leg on it that they had then gone and screwed back in. Keep in mind, this is a $200 chair. And they just went and said, hey, we're just going to throw a screw back in here. Oh, that doesn't quite work so well, so let's just go and hide it by throwing it in the garage. And that's what the management company did. Because again, the management company doesn't actually care. You as a property owner are literally the only one who cares about your property and cares about what's inside your property. That's it. No one else does. When I confronted the management company on this, they pretended like they didn't even know about it. First, they said that there wasn't anything wrong, nothing had happened, and then I showed it to them. I said, oh, that was there before, and then I reminded them it was brand new furniture that literally was delivered for the purpose of them managing the house with. Then I showed them pictures of like a couple months before when it wasn't that way, and now it is that way. Then again, they were saying, oh, we didn't know about it, and then I'm like, so you didn't know about it, you just happened to accidentally re-screw in this leg and then go hide it in the garage. And then when you staged the house, you tried to rearrange it so that it hid the fact that there was a missing chair. Like that's you not knowing about it, right? Just want to make sure. Needless to say, I ended up firing this management company, but I learned a lot of lessons along the way. And one of the things I learned is, again, I'm going to emphasize it again. You are the only one, as a property owner, you are the only one who cares about your property. A management company will never care about your property. It's one of the reasons I try to avoid using a management company at all costs. Needless to say, I lost a lot of money in 2020 on these properties, on rental properties in general, primarily because I couldn't predict COVID. But who could predict COVID? That's something you really can't predict. And it wasn't just because of COVID. Part of it was I chose a really bad management company. I didn't know it was a bad management company at the time. I did what I could to try to vet this management company. I wasn't in a position to be able to manage them myself. So I really was at the mercy of having to use a management company. And I was hoping to be able to put an expert in there, because I believe heavily in hiring out things to people who are experts in their field to do those tasks. Let's talk about the rent aspect. Let's say you've chosen to self-manage and you're going with Zillow, you found someone great, you want to put them in there. How do you know what to even charge for rent? What should the terms be to set up? And what about rent raises? These are all very important things I wish I had known when I first became a landlord, and how to address them and reevaluate them as I go along. A big mistake many people make when they first start out is not accurately accounting their costs. So they'll look at it and say, oh, I've got a mortgage payment of X. I need at least X in order to make rent. Great. So they charge X. But they're not accounting for unexpected costs, then they're not accounting for inflation or for anything that goes up associated with these costs. For example, you have a mortgage, yes, but every year you pay taxes. Part of that might be wrapped into your mortgage, that might be separate. Taxes tend to go up. You also have insurance on your property. Insurance tends to go up, especially in some states that have high insurances to begin with. Some states in particular, like Florida, have actually gone up a lot. Other expenses that you might not be accounting for are regular maintenance. So you might have appliances that break. You might have to go in and replace all your appliances. Every so often, you might need to go and rebuild something. You might need to repaint. You might need to refloor. All those sort of things, as well as actual damage that might happen at some point. There could also be yard work that you have to factor in there. Also HOA. Keep in mind, HOAs tend to also go up, and a lot of times they'll have special assessments in certain events. So an HOA might decide they want to do a large scale yard project. They get the buy off on it, and now you're stuck with another $200 a month bill, or sometimes even $1,000 a month bill for X number of years. These are all things that you're going to have to factor in when you're thinking about rent and anticipate when setting rent in the first place. So just because your mortgage payment is X does not mean your expenses are X. Your expenses are X plus whatever each one of the breakdown of the mortgage payment, X plus the increase of each one of those, and those other unexpected expenses. These are unanticipated things, and a lot of people like to set aside about 10% of their rent just to go into that. That means if you're charging $2,000 a month rent, that's $200 a month are going into unexpected expenses. Just off the top of my head, with thinking of those numbers, I can think of a lot of months where I had way more than just $200 worth of expenses. I can think of months where I had thousands of dollars worth of unexpected expenses. You want to set those aside and accumulate them so that you can then use them and make sure that you're not spending it on your own personal bills. You need to set it aside so that you can use it when those expenses come up. If you're breaking down all of the costs associated that you have to cover with rent, you're talking the regular mortgage, if there is one, which should include your taxes and your insurance. You also have to factor in your HOA. You have to factor in those unexpected expenses. You have to factor in any special assessments and any sort of regular maintenance that you know that there already is. This could include, if you have a pool, you might be doing a pool service, you might have a yard service, any of these sort of things you're going to have to factor in. And keep in mind, each one of these are going to inflate almost every year, especially right now in a time of high inflation. This last year, my expenses have gone through the roof on all of my properties. What I'm trying to say here is, if you went into this and initially said, my mortgage is X, so I'm going to charge X. If you're just doing that, you're just saying, hey, expenses are X, so I'm going to charge X in rent. You're going to lose money hand over fist very fast, especially the first time that one of these things inflates. Also, know your schedule of when these things inflate. So, for example, taxes, it might be at the end of the year, it might be in November timeframe when they get paid. Your insurance, same thing. It might be October, it might be November, it might be the middle of the year. It depends on what your schedule is. And when these come up for payment is when you're going to find out that, oh, these have been inflated. So when you're going to set rent, anticipate those and say, hey, here's the current amount that I pay, that's X. The only part that might be constant is the part of the mortgage which goes into the principal and interest if you have a fixed rate loan. Otherwise, that can change too if you have a variable rate loan. Take a look at it and say, hey, here's the cost, and here is the rate of inflation, and look at the past years as well and calculate to see what you can reasonably anticipate this next year. The next time that they raise it on you, how much is that going to be? So you can now factor that into what your expenses actually are. Take a look at all of your expenses as well, like lawn care. I know those have gone up a lot, or pool care. Those have gone up a lot too. Factor those in and say, all right, so if I'm setting rent now, but I know that they rate, like let's say it's January 1st, you're setting rent at January 1st, but you know that last year they raised this on you in March. So you can anticipate and say, hey, I'm probably going to have the same raise again in cost in March by $200 on this aspect, $300 here and $400 here. So I can bake that into the rent now when I'm setting the lease, instead of setting the lease where I barely break even and then go into the year and start losing money. By the end of the year, you're losing a ton of money. And remember the buffer. Never forget about a buffer. This is for the unexpected expenses. This is for the something drastic just happened to this property. I need to pay X money into it right now. And that's where setting aside, even if you're just setting aside 10% of the rent into it, very valuable. That will pay off dividends down the road. Keep in mind, you also have to pay yourself. I'm not talking about paying yourself an exorbitant salary. I'm saying pay yourself to make it actually worth what you're doing here. You're taking on substantial risk by being a landlord. You have to be rewarded for it. Otherwise, what's the point? Keep in mind, this is a business. Run it like a business. It's not a charity. It's not here, let me subsidize your rental cost, let me subsidize your living costs, and in exchange, I'm going to be eating top ramen and tuna every night so that you can live the life that you want while I subsidize your rent for you. That's not what this is. You have to think of it as a business. Otherwise, you're going to be that situation where you're going to be eating top ramen all the time and not being able to pay your own bills. It is a business. And while it may seem harsh, it is a reality that you have to get used to in anything with business. Again, that does not give you an excuse to go out and price gouge. That does not give you an excuse to treat your tenants poorly or ignore them or be negligent toward them or anything. No, you need to do everything right, do it by the book, but at the end of the day, you also still need to remember you need to be able to pay yourself. People talk a lot about cap rates, and realistically, those factor in more into multifamilies than they do into single family. What I've been talking about here mostly is a single family, a townhouse, or an apartment or condo, something along those lines there. Keep in mind as well, the cap rate really goes into your analysis into the purchase of the property itself. Really, there's an old adage that you make your money in a property transaction or in real estate or being a landlord at the purchase point, not at the sell price. And that's very true. So that's when you would factor in a cap rate. What I'm talking about here is a property you already own and you're deciding you want to rent it. Whether it's because you haven't lived in it for a while, you have a second home or whatnot, whatever the situation is, you're deciding you want to rent it. Another thing you can do as well, if you want to become a landlord, you don't have money to buy a second property, is you can move out of your own property and start renting. Rent at a lower rent area and go ahead and put a tenant in your home. That's another way of becoming a landlord. Something else that's very important to talk about, especially in a long-term tenancy, is some sort of deposit, security deposit, bond, anything like that, last month, first month rent, these sort of things. What you really should be doing, and some states don't allow you to do bonds or anything like that, so I'm not even going to address those. What I'm going to address here is just the fact that you need to protect yourself. Keep in mind, when someone moves in, they're paying you before that month. So they're paying you at the first of the month in order to have the right to be able to live in that property for that month. And if they don't pay, that's what can start the eviction process, because they're now living in a space that they haven't actually paid for. So with that in mind, what you need to, or the way that you need to protect yourself is a couple of ways. One is against them damaging the property, and two is against them not paying rent. So typically you'll collect first month rent up front. A lot of places will also collect last month rent, and some places will collect a security deposit. It's really important to distinguish this. A lot of states treat it differently. Check with your state specifically to see how it's treated. But if you collect a last month rent and you define it as last month's rent, that's exactly what that is. That is last month's rent. That's not a security deposit. So you can't actually, usually, again, this is state dependent, you can't go in and take from last month's rent if they damaged your property. That is last month's rent. That's why you want to collect a security deposit as well. And the security deposit can be used for things that you outline in the lease, including, depending on state dependent again, including professionally cleaning the property to bring it back to usable value. Now, keep in mind, there's going to be regular wear and tear on the property, which you can't claw into a security deposit for wear and tear. You need to do right by your tenants, and you need to return the security deposit when they are entitled to the security deposit. At the same time, if they legitimately damage something, that is exactly what you use the security deposit for, and that is not last month's rent that you're using that for. The other scenario is if a tenant decides to break the lease halfway through. They can't legally do that, but some of them sometimes do. They might walk out on it, or they might fall on hard times, or an eviction might happen. How do you protect yourself again in those situations? So if you're in a situation where the tenant leaves and breaks the lease and you don't have the terms spelled out in your contract on what happens under those circumstances, you might have to go to court, and you might have to try to get the rest of the remaining part of that lease. At the same time, you might be having to go and try to find another tenant to subsidize the fact that you don't have anyone in there and to mitigate the damages. The court is going to look more favorable upon you if you do mitigate the damages. To help offset those as well, that's partly where a security deposit can come into play, where the money is already in your holding, that the tenant is now doing something that is outside the lease. They have damaged your property, they have left, something along those lines, and that security deposit can go to offset some of those expenses. And the last month's rent is literally its last month's rent, which means the last month of the lease, they're not going to pay you if they're not renewing, because that is already prepaid, which also would be state dependent again, allowing you to be able to use that in the event of an eviction and they leave and they were in there for a month and they didn't pay you during that month. Well, that became the last month. That's now last month's rent. Again, that is state dependent. Another thing I wish I had known about real estate, or specifically being a landlord before I became a landlord, is it's not this super easy kick back and collect passive income. That's what a lot of people like to show it as. You'll see it on movies, you'll see it everywhere, you'll see people advertise as, hey, just buy some real estate and become filthy rich and just sit back and collect all this money. In reality, that's not how it goes. All of the things that I've talked about so far are things I hope will highlight to you the amount of issues that can arise. And as a landlord, you're responsible to fix these issues. So it can almost be a daily basis of you addressing something. And when you have enough properties, it can truly become every day. If you're managing yourself, you don't have a management company to act as your middleman. These are things from just the simple paperwork and the legal work and compliance. So drafting new leases, making sure you're compliant with the new laws of your state or your county or even the HOA on the rental terms, as well as making sure that you're receiving rent. So anyone who's missing rent, making sure that you don't miss deadlines on when to send eviction notices to start the eviction process, because it is a legal process and it is not something that you can just go and turn on and change the locks. In fact, that's something I want to point out here too. I don't know of a single state that will let you do what's called self-help. So if a tenant decides not to pay, you can't just go in there and change the locks and say, see ya. And you can't turn off the utilities. You have to keep those on, which means that you're probably going to be paying for those in the meantime. The utility company might turn them off, but you can't go and shut them off. So you actually have to go and file with the court and go through the court process and get a legal judgment of eviction before you can actually evict a tenant. That's one of the reasons you need to watch very carefully, make sure that your rents are coming in, and talk with the tenants to make sure that they can pay their rents, or see what's going on, why they didn't pay their rent. And if they're not paying their rent, you need to make sure that you're following the letter of the law very carefully, because eviction processes are very attention to detail oriented. So you have to have the right timelines. You can't skip any steps. You have to give the proper notices. Everything has to be done by the book, which is good, because there's two parties here. There is a tenant who needs to be protected, and there's a landlord who needs to be protected. Yes, both parties have interests here. You don't want a tenant who's not paying, because that's just freeloading. That's taking your property and using it for free. That's wrong. That needs to be protected against. At the same time, you need to protect the landlord, or the tenants from the landlords, because the landlords have substantially higher power in this agreement. So if you gave all the power to the landlords, then you'd end up with a bunch of slumlords. Obviously, a lot of landlords are actually really good people, and they have no interest in being a slumlord. I'm just talking about the balance of the power of the dynamics here. That's all that is. And that's why the law has to set it up, so that you have to go to the court and get the court to rule it, to say, hey, yes, this is an eviction, this is a legal eviction, now you have to leave, and now, landlord, you have the rights to be able to do this. It's a protection mechanism that protects both parties. So that's one of the things, attention to detail on your booking, or on your records. Also, the legal compliance, just keeping up with an LLC, making sure that you do your filings properly. Taxes are a big thing I wish I'd known about. And for all of these, I would highly recommend hiring it out to a professional. It's one of the things that I do myself, is if someone else has more skill in an area, I'm going to try to get them to do that for me. If it means I have to hire them, that's fine. I don't mind hiring it. It's just going to be faster and better quality if they do it, as opposed to me going out, learning the skill, and then me doing it. So in this case, I use a CPA for my taxes, because Otherwise, I'm going to miss something in there. I want to make sure that I have a professional, someone who's the best in the field to do it. And I also use an attorney. I'm an attorney myself, and I'll use an attorney when I don't have time to do something. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about these or how to file any of these things. Again, I only practice law in Florida, so I'm only licensed in Florida. I can only give advice on Florida. Nothing I've said here today should be taken as legal advice. This is not legal advice. This is just me sharing with you what I have learned along the way from my personal experience as a landlord. You're also going to have, if you're self-managing, you're going to have those calls in the middle of the night. Hey, my AC isn't working. Hey, there's a water pipe that's broken. Hey, this broke. Hey, that broke, at all different hours of the day and night. And you're going to have to be able to either address it, or you're going to have to be able to go out there and fix it yourself. And again, these expenses, balancing expenses versus rent, it's one of the hardest things with being a landlord, is being able to anticipate what kind of expenses are going to come up. And I've lost a lot of money myself by misestimating that in the beginning. So again, this really isn't just kick back and relax and collect a bunch of rent and be a slumlord or anything like that. That's not at all what being a landlord is. And if you think that, you might want to recheck if this is really for you. I will say it is one of the best ways of growing wealth. Absolutely, hands down it is. It's just that it takes time. Don't think that you're going to become a landlord today and be rich tomorrow. That's not how this works. And no valid investment strategy actually works that way. Yes, you can win the lottery. Sure, but most people don't. And if you want to win the lottery, go play the lottery. Don't play real estate. Well, I hope you've been able to learn a couple of tips or tricks that I wish I had known when I first became a landlord over 10 years ago. And as always, feel free to hit me up, DM me, reach out to me if you want to hear more about any of these topics. If you want any of the resources, want to know some of the people I've hired, or want to work with me on any of these specific things, feel free to hit me up. I'll be more than happy to point you in the right direction or help you out myself. And if you have ideas for future topics, go ahead and let me know. And I'll be more than happy to do an entire episode on something that you want me to as well. In fact, that was the basis for this specific one-off on the real estate section to begin with. And as always, if you enjoyed this show, go ahead and hit the subscribe button.